rumored to be residing in the small rural town of Childress, Texas, was a devil cult known as the Merchants of Death. The abandoned home in which they partook in satanic rituals was known by locals as the Haunted House. And near the end of each month, a red light would glow from the porch and summon members of the cult to assemble and take part in a sacrifice to the red-horned king of the dark realm. It was usually an animal, a cat, a dog, sometimes a goat, but on some rare occasions, it was a human, and likely a child. But on this night, in July 1988, a dozen cult members in black robes surrounded the trunk of a thick apple tree that sat at the edge of a rural back road. There, they chanted ominously as a young man, only 17 years of age, swayed from the end of a noose hung in the tree above them. The boy's name was Tate Rowland. In recent years, news media has begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the Satanic Panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Ritual Rewind brings you into the darkest corners of the 1980s, uncovering the crimes, conspiracies, and occult fears that shaped a generation. Tonight, we rewind it back to 1988 and again revisit the panhandle of Texas, where we uncover the mysterious death of Tate Rowland and his sister, Terri. It's a tale of teenage angst and small-town secrets. It's the case of the devil in Childress. I'm your host, Drew, and you're listening to The Ritual Rewind. By all accounts, Tate Rowland lived a charmed life for almost all his nearly 17 years on this earth. His father, Jimmy, worked for the railroads, specifically Burlington Northern, and traveled a lot because of it, returning home only on weekends. This left Tate to be raised by his sister Terri and his stepmother Brenda. Tate was popular amongst his peers, and girls flocked all around him. He had a love for racing and could easily be found on Friday nights hot-rodding his blue short-bed pickup up and down the town's main strip. And it was there Tate would meet the woman he considered the love of his life, Karen Hackler. Karen was a beautiful young woman, 5 years Tate's senior, and the daughter of a wealthy cotton farmer. She shared his passion for racing, and they often chased each other in their cars around town. Karen's parents were not supportive of the relationship and encouraged her to end it with Tate. They believed that Karen was running away from growing up. Karen did attempt to abide by her parents' wishes, but Tate refused to let her go. He was enthralled by her, fascinated by her, to an almost childish degree. Tate would steal her pocketbook or jewelry. This would force Karen to have to interact with him, to ask for them back. On one occasion, Tate drove into her driveway, spun donuts, and sprayed gravel against her front porch, anything to get her attention. Eventually, his obsession with Karen turned violent. In an incident in early 1988, Tate was arrested for attempting to strangle Karen. But the charges were dropped at Karen's insistence. But that incident didn't cause Tate to back off, resulting in a vicious confrontation with Karen's brother. Tate attempted to run Karen's brother over with his truck. After this incident, Tate's father Jimmy and his stepmother Brenda thought it was best to send Tate away. He went to live with relatives in Louisiana for the remainder of the school year. And when Tate returned home 6 months later, he was devastated to discover that Karen had gotten married. Tate drowned his sorrows in the bottle, getting drunk most nights and racing up and down the strip. In his pain, Tate found a friend in 15-year-old Chad Johnson. Chad was new in town and had only lived there for less than a year and wasn't well liked amongst his peers. They considered him odd and unsettling for reasons they couldn't explain. It was more of a feeling, really, and maybe they were onto something, because it was in the company of Chad Johnson that Tate would lose his life. On July 26, 1988, at 6 p.m., Brenda Rowland was in her kitchen with her husband Jimmy, preparing the evening's dinner, when Chad Johnson burst through the screen door of their home. "Tate's dead," Chad stated. It was almost matter of fact, with little emotion. Brenda and Jimmy immediately jumped into action and followed Chad out. He drove them towards Boxer's Corner, a sharp curve in a dirt road, marked by a large apple tree at its apex. Brenda and Jimmy's minds were twisted. Tate must have wrecked his truck. He was always racing it, and recently he had been doing this under the influence. But to their horror, it was much worse. So much worse, and exponentially more tragic. There, they saw Tate hanging from a branch, swaying in the wind, a rope wrapped around his throat, his feet just inches off the ground. Before the truck even stopped, Jimmy was out of the car and raced to help his son. He cut him down, and Brenda watched as Jimmy pounded Tate's chest in hopes that were ultimately futile that he could revive his son. The authorities were called, and Sheriff Claude Lane, a farmer by trade and elected to his position without any training, quickly ruled Tate's death as a suicide. Many of Tate's friends and family refused to accept that decision. It was their belief that Tate would never kill himself. He had to have been murdered. And their suspicions quickly fell on Chad Johnson, and rightfully so. He was the last one with Tate before his untimely death. He admitted as much. And Chad had a story to tell, but the problem with Chad's story was that there were 3 versions of it. Chad's first story began believably enough. The two of them started the day at Tate's home, watching a movie on VHS. And after the movie finished, Tate made a phone call to Karen that lasted for over half an hour. Chad was vague on the details of the call, but afterwards Tate began to ruminate on the value of his own life and whether it was still worth living. Karen, for her part, said Tate called her to mostly talk about his problems. Tate then suggested to Chad that they find someone to buy them a beer so he could get drunk one last time. Chad agreed, and they left to pick up a 12-pack of Coors Light at the supermarket. It was in the parking lot of the supermarket that Tate saw some of his friends and made some plans to meet up for a softball game later that evening. Tate's friends time-stamped this to be around 5 p.m., and in less than an hour, he would be dead. According to Chad, they then drove to Boxer's Corner. They drank through the case of beer, and as they got drunk, Tate began to speak of his funeral. Chad asked if he wanted Karen to be there, and Tate shrugged. If she wants to come, that's fine with me. Chad then left the despondent Tate alone to go take a piss behind the apple tree. And when he returned, about 3 minutes later, according to Chad, Tate was hanging from the tree. Chad claimed that he couldn't reach Tate to cut him down, and so he left for help. Reese Bowen, a deputy with the sheriff's department, had his suspicions of Chad. He knew Tate and didn't think he was the type of kid that would kill himself. He thought Chad, the only witness, was too cold and too detached, not something you would expect from a kid who watched his friend kill himself just moments before. And thirdly, and likely the most important reason for his suspicions, was that there were 2 sets of rope marks around Tate's neck. Usually in a suicide by hanging, there is 1. To the deputy, this was a clear sign that Tate was murdered, likely strangled to death with the rope and then hung up on the tree to cover up the crime. A few days after Tate's death, Chad contacted Jimmy and Brenda in their home and told them that Tate had wanted Chad to have his car and the remaining money in his bank account. And then Chad began to list the numerous requests that Tate had made in regards to his funeral, such as the type of coffin and the song that he wanted played. Jimmy promptly and rightfully threw Chad out of his home. Chad was interviewed by police again, this time about the 2 rope marks discovered on Tate's neck. And Chad had another story to tell. Chad claimed that Tate had attempted to commit suicide twice. The first time, the rope broke, and Tate lamented that he couldn't even kill himself correctly. Chad laughed it off at first, thinking Tate was only joking around. But then Tate strung up the rope again and attempted it for a second time. Chad watched as Tate struggled to breathe. It was only after Tate had gone still that Chad left to get help. The reason behind his altered story, Chad was worried that he'd get in trouble for allowing Tate to kill himself. Chad and his family would move out of Childress less than a month after Tate's death. Further investigations into Tate Rowland's death revealed that on July 9, 1988, 2 weeks before his supposed suicide, Tate had been arrested in Paducah, Texas, for drunk and disorderly conduct. But it was his interaction with a deputy at the jailhouse in Paducah that really sparked the rumors of a devil cult in Childress to life. Deputy Beatrice Perkins said that Tate acted oddly and said that he was traveling with a group of Satanists. There were no investigations into the matter, and on the following morning, Tate was released with a small fine and told to go back home. But because of this, the people of Childress began to suspect that Tate was a member of a satanic cult, and his murder was the result of that. Tall tales began to swirl around the community that Tate was killed because he refused to kidnap his stepsisters and allow them to be used in a ritual sacrifice. His two stepsisters were blue-eyed and blonde. Seemingly to add some credence to this story, Terri, Tate's sister, claims that Tate had warned her shortly before his death to keep her children, who were also blonde-haired and blue-eyed, off the streets and inside, because there were some bad people in town kidnapping children. Around the same time, police received reports from concerned parents that claimed to have seen strangers showing up at the elementary school. Strange incidents began to occur around the town of Childress. One night, the sheriff's department was called to Boxer's Corner, which had been redubbed by the kids in town as the Hanging Tree. The police report stated that a cow's skull was found pressed between the branches of the tree, and rocks were stacked below it in what appeared to be an altar. Another sheriff's deputy on patrol passed by the cemetery late at night and saw a cloaked figure standing over Tate's grave. And when he approached, the man fled. And then again, on Halloween night in 1988, a group of high schoolers heard a rumor that the cult was going to dig up Tate's body and steal his bones for a ritual. The group of about a dozen teenagers rode a truck into the cemetery towards Tate's grave, and as they got closer, they began to hear music. Then, suddenly, some headlights turned on right next to Tate's grave, and the kids went nuts. They whipped their truck around and sped off. As they were fleeing the scene, one of them noticed pentagrams painted on the cemetery's shed. At this point, the town of Childress was in a full-blown panic. It was to such an extent that the First Baptist Church hosted a seminar on Satanism with nearly 500 people in attendance, as an occult expert presented ways in which children could be coerced into devil worship by listening to heavy metal music and playing violent video games. It was so bad, in fact, that Karen, grieving the loss of a one-time love, couldn't escape the accusations. Karen was accused of seducing Tate into the cult. She got labeled the cult's queen bee, and when kids would see her on the street, they crossed their fingers to form a cross in hopes of warding her off. But what may have been one of the weirdest things to happen was when the sheriff's department received a call from authorities in Lockhart, Texas, about a girl visiting from Childress who told another girl from Lockhart that she had a dream of a cult and that they met at an abandoned house with a red porch light. The young girl had said that the cult had used a car to run down a boy a few years earlier and then hanged him in the home. The sheriff's department did find the abandoned home, but it recently had burned to the ground. And they also did learn that a 15-year-old boy had been killed in a hit and run a few years before while walking home from work. But the investigation was unable to gain any further insight into the matters. On November 6, 1988, a man reported his car stolen. The sheriff deputies quickly found the car wrecked, having crashed head-on into a utility pole. Inside, they found the car thief, 16-year-old Ray Wilkes. Ray came from a long line of what the locals dubbed poor, redneck scumbags. Ray was drunk and drugged, and upon seeing the sheriff's deputies, he threatened to kill them. While under arrest, Ray continued to make threats and alerted deputies to the fact that he was a member of a satanic cult and had participated in the ritual sacrifice of Tate Rowland. This confession prompted a search of the Wilkes residence, which had been known throughout town as the Devil's House. It was a dilapidated drug house, and inside authorities found what they described as an occult room with a disturbing stash of pornographic and satanic art. They also found a black cloak, a pointed hat, and a wand with a goat's head on it. Tate's sister Terri took her brother's death hard, harder than probably anyone else in her family. She never believed that Tate killed himself. She knew he had to have been murdered, and she dedicated the remainder of her short life to finding her brother's killer. Her investigation led her deep into the seedy side of Childress and resulted in a drug and alcohol addiction. In the years after Tate's passing, Terri divorced her husband, gave up custody of her 4 children, and started partying with the Wilkes brothers in the Devil's House. To further complicate matters, she began a relationship with ex-con Ricky Bradford. Ricky was Ray Wilkes' best friend. Ray Wilkes, if you remember, was the one who claimed to have participated in the murder of Terri's brother. Terri's life spiraled out of control, and 3 years after her brother's death, she was found deceased in Ricky's bed on Memorial Day in 1991. A meager investigation into her death revealed blood between her legs and on her pillow. Her initial autopsy revealed that Terri had died by choking on her own vomit, though she was lying face down when discovered. The sheriff's department claimed to have found no evidence of foul play. Her blood alcohol had been over twice the legal limit, and the coroner, along with Sheriff Claude Lane, ruled her death accidental. But people close to Terri couldn't help but think her death was somehow connected to her brother, and Terri would have agreed. Terri told her father, Jimmy, one day shortly before her death, that if she died, look at Ricky Bradford, because I'm getting close to Tate's murder. So it should be considered odd that Terri ended up dead on the bed of the same man she believed had murdered her brother. With Terri's death bringing Tate Rowland's death back into the headlines, Sheriff Claude Lane refused to reopen the case. But later that year, Sheriff Claude Lane was arrested and imprisoned for running a large-scale marijuana operation in the county. Deputy Reese Bowen was appointed interim sheriff to take his place before eventually being elected to the position. Bowen immediately reopened the case into Tate and Terri's death and began to re-interview persons of interest. It was then that Chad Johnson presented his third and final narrative of what happened to Tate on that fateful day in 1988. Chad said that Tate didn't intend to kill himself, but did so accidentally. That Tate was swinging around the tree with the rope, and when Chad excused himself to urinate, he returned to find Tate had hanged himself, likely getting caught in the rope by accident. During the time of the reopened investigation, Darwin Wilkes, Ray Wilkes' brother, attempted suicide by overdosing on Elavil, an antidepressant that also acts as a strong sedative. Darwin left a note that read, I know something that the cops don't know. I know who killed Terri, and I can't live with it anymore. However, Darwin survived the overdose and was questioned about the note. He claimed ignorance, but the damage was done, and the community wanted answers. Sheriff Bowen petitioned the courts for the exhumation of Tate and Terri's bodies, and to allow them to be reevaluated by a second autopsy from an outside party. The petition was granted. Upon exhumation, it was discovered that Tate's body was far too decomposed to allow for much testing or examination, though they did find trace amounts of Elavil in the tissue that remained. It's the same drug that Darwin Wilkes had used in an overdose. A toxicology report on Terri also found high levels of Elavil in her system. The coroner also reported bruises on her thigh and mouth that indicated blunt force trauma. He believed that she had been assaulted prior to her death. In March of 1992, Frank and Darwin Wilkes went to the sheriff's department and pinned the murder of Terri onto Ricky Bradford. They claimed that Ricky confessed at a barbecue and threatened to burn down their home and gouge out their eyes if they ever told anyone. Bowen quickly arrested Ricky. Ricky claimed it was a frame-up job by the Wilkes. He accused them of satanic worship, saying them Wilkes brothers had been seen wearing black capes and doing Ouija boards and loading goats into cars. It didn't matter. Ricky was put on trial, and coincidentally enough, just before trial, the prosecutor's house burned to the ground. A threat that the Wilkes had claimed Ricky made against them. However, it could not be determined whether the fire was accidental or whether it was arson. At trial, Betty Lewis, a girlfriend of one of the Wilkes brothers, testified that she had witnessed Ricky smother Terri with a pillow. Ricky was ultimately convicted of the murder with less than an hour of deliberations. No one has been tried or convicted of Tate's death. In researching this episode, we relied on the Texas Monthly article Possessed by the Devil by Skip Hollandsworth and the book The Devil's Best Trick by Randall Sullivan. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. It's official. We have become a worldwide podcast with listeners in Canada, Singapore, Ghana, Hungary, Chile, and the Netherlands, as well as the United States. I'm still looking to grow this podcast, so if you like it, please rate it, review it, and share it with others. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, give it a like and a comment. And as always, you can interact with us at The Ritual Rewind on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Thank you for listening, and have a good night.